We live in what Bolter describes as the late age of print, where many texts will never be printed, only to exist in digital form. However, it is important to remember that the printed book evolved to be the most highly valued form of writing at one time. The changes in book production and distribution helped to mobilize information and spawn the onset for mass literacy. The creation of the book has gone through many evolutions and has significant effect on the economics of information. As Bolter states, we might call each such shift a remediation in the sense that a newer medium takes the place of an older one, borrowing and recognizing the characteristics of writing in the older medium and reforming in its cultural space. When thinking about the mobilization of knowledge through book production, the brief history of the evolution of books should be examined. Before the invention of the printing press, the papyrus roll was used to keep important texts and share information. It still being a heavily oral society, the texts were usually read aloud. The papyrus roll was also very long, too long to be useful. As they were shortened in length, they no longer were an effective format to transmit knowledge of historians, poets, and philosophers. The development of the codex followed, and opened new possibilities for readers and writers by providing a space that could hold a significant more amount of text than a papyrus roll. The codex was compact and more durable than the scroll, which meant information could travel easier. This was an important evolution from the previous system. In fact, it led to a major shift in the distribution of literacy and expansion of education in Europe. That is, if one happened to be either Catholic or wealthy at the time. As individual study in wealthy homes became more important throughout the Middle Ages, the demand for more and more books increased and literacy began to rise. The monks, who were often the scribes of replicating books, could not keep up with the growing demand. However, there was a dangerous norm being established. Due to the fact that books were limited in number and it was monks who did most of the scribing, it was the Catholic Church who controlled not only what was read, but also who was allowed to read it. Even though this was the beginning of the mobilization of knowledge through book production, it was very small, controlled, and individual at first. Around 1300 BC and other locations around the world, namely in China, written documentation was also occurring. The ancient Chinese made books of wood or bamboo strips bound together with cords. The Chinese were also involved in printmaking. However, the invention of the printing press is attributed to Johannes Gutenberg of Germany. The printing press came along and changed everything in one swift turn of the page. Gutenberg used movable type that was designed to look like hand lettering to produce a Latin Bible in 1456, becoming the first printed book. Going back to the aforementioned quote by Bolter, it was an important choice that the first printing mimicked handwriting. The technology had familiar qualities of old books and therefore was more easily accepted. As Gutenberg redefined his invention, he brought other adaptations forward. Each one of these improvements aided to a higher yield in production. More and more cities were building and using the printing press for their own book production. This helped the sparking Protestant Revolution catch fire and spread across Europe, along with the skill of literacy that was quickly becoming a necessity rather than luxury. By the time of Gutenberg's press, the rise of universities, mostly in Italy at first, was already on the way. As books became easier to produce, more universities followed. The volume of books that came on the market in this century would demand new skills from these academics. As more and more books were created, so were the systems to support such a mass production. Not since the existence of the Alexandrian Library was there a need to categorize information to this degree. The printer's shop became filled with scholars, merchants, craftsmen, and mechanics, all together for the first time in a commercial environment. The technology produced not just books, but also the printer's scholar, a new man, adept in handling machines and marketing products, even while editing texts, founding learned societies, promoting artists and authors, and advancing new forms of data collection. These effects transformed intellectual and business landscapes at the local level. However, this did not happen overnight. There were religious, political, social, and educational battles to first be won and reformed. The initial introduction of the printing press did not constitute for the greater public access to knowledge that we all may think. The upper class had major concerns that public knowledge would empower people and further lead towards a revolution. In the pre-industrial era, commerce was a more important source of urban wealth and income than tradable industrial production, so primary educational needs arose from this. Starting in the 1480s, European presses produced a stream of commercial arithmetics, the first printed mathematics textbooks designed for students preparing for careers in business. In addition, merchant manuals combined accounting and mathematics with business advice, including tables that simplified the calculation of interest on tariffs and loans and other costs. The first known printed mathematics text is the Treviso Arithmetic, 1478. Broadly, print media was also associated with the diffusion of cutting-edge business practice, such as bookkeeping, literacy, and the social rise of new professionals, merchants, lawyers, officials, doctors, and teachers. Book production and circulation took on a new seriousness with the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Advances in technology allowed books to be produced more cost-effectively and transported further and faster. Books and texts were an important aspect of intellectual domination within the English-speaking colonies, and other nations soon followed. The next step, and one of the major key factors towards the education of the disenfranchised and steps towards mass literacy, was the expansion of international book publishing and distribution. Other countries saw what was being done and quickly scrambled to replicate the process. This increase in production and distribution continued through the 18th and 19th century, and as other countries became industrialized, the general public's desire to consume materials of the printing press continued to increase. In the 18th century, the middle classes became more important as readers in the United States, France, and England. The exception, of course, was the lower class, which remained largely literate and had very limited access to education. This stayed the norm in the approach to literacy into the onset of the 19th century. With the 19th century came a change in the development of a mass readership, a mass market for books, and a new important status of reading. This was largely due to the fact that educational reform around the demand for literacy was starting to make waves, as well as continue to promote an even higher demand for printed books. The access of the lower classes to schooling and literacy was finally taking a priority in France, in the United States, and in Great Britain. Laws regulating mandatory primary schooling led to higher literacy rates. Unfortunately, this did not mean that all people could read or read well. However, there were more people than ever reading books because schooling was provided more consistently and with structured literacy instruction. Literacy for the public continued to increase, and the production of books continued to play an important role in this development. The new mass literacy and education reforms finally included a large variety of people from different social classes, region, and with various opinions. Society started to see the mass publication of newspapers, magazines, and novels. At the same time, books became more affordable for lower class, further supporting education through literacy. Books began to reach more people, education expanded across Europe and North America, and people gained access to information on health, science, medicine, skilled labor and trades, and politics. Public knowledge and understanding expanded, also creating and supporting significant social and cultural changes. Looking back, mass literacy and education were impacted significantly with the increase in changes in book production. One of the most monumental shifts was the shift from elitist reading to general public reading. The invention of the printing press helped this shift to take form into a solid and permanent educational change on national and global levels. With industrialization, mass book production allowed for greater public access and affordability to books. A greater value on education for all emerged, and literacy became important to many people. Books became an inseparable part of education, and while students were not necessarily achieving our modern form of literate, it was an important shift towards a new society, culture, and economy. The mass production of books forever changed many political, economic, and religious paths. However, the most profound contribution was in creating a world where education could be accessed through the tool of literacy by more than just the privileged. Instead, it became the privilege of many to be able to pick up their favorite publication and read.